December 16, 1944. A bitter cold grips the Ardennes. German soldiers crouch in muddy foxholes, frost clinging to uniforms. The forest is silent, tense, awaiting the next thunder of artillery. Their defensive lines, stretched thin and exhausted, seem secure until the ground begins to shake. Over the ridge, shadows emerge. American tanks. M4 Shermans, their steel hulks rolling with unrelenting force, punctuate the horizon. Tracks crush snow and barbed wire. Guns rumble, and machine guns fire with precision. Infantry positions that once seemed defensible vanish under shells and armored momentum. Shock spreads through the defenders. Captain Dieter Weber later recalled, "We had faced artillery, mortars, everything. But this was different. It was as if the earth itself had risen against us." The tanks are not just machines. They are instruments of awe and terror. Every bunker, every trench, every wire entanglement falls beneath their advance. For the German infantry, the realization is immediate. Their last defenses, painstakingly prepared, cannot withstand the relentless American armored assault. The battlefield has shifted. Steel meets strategy, courage confronts technology, and the Western Front will never be the same. By late 1944, the Allied advance into Western Europe had become a complex dance of coordination, logistics, and sheer firepower. After the success of D-Day and the liberation of Normandy, American forces faced a German military entrenched, desperate, and still highly capable. The need for mobility, protection, and sustained firepower had never been clearer, and tanks had emerged as the spearhead of this strategy. The M4 Sherman, America's primary medium tank, was the product of both necessity and industrial might. Designed for mass production, it balanced mobility, armor, and firepower. While not the heaviest tank on the battlefield, its versatility allowed it to be deployed across varied terrain, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes. Its 75mm gun could engage infantry, fortifications, and lighter armored vehicles, while heavier versions carried 70mm cannons or additional armor for more direct engagements. American armored doctrine emphasized combined arms coordination. Tanks rarely operated alone. Infantry, artillery, and engineers worked in tandem to maximize the impact of mechanized assaults. Tanks suppressed enemy positions, breached obstacles, and provided mobile fire support. Infantry protected tanks from anti-tank weapons, engineers cleared mines and wire, and artillery softened strong points in preparation for the armored advance. This integration ensured that each element of the force amplified the others, creating a relentless, cohesive offensive. The industrial scale of American production further reinforced strategic advantage. Factories churned out Shermans in unprecedented numbers, enabling sustained armored operations even when losses were heavy. Replacement crews were trained rapidly, and maintenance units kept tanks operational in challenging conditions. Mobility and firepower combined with logistical efficiency allowed American armored units to advance at a tempo that constantly pressured German defenses. Beyond hardware, leadership and planning were critical. American commanders studied German defensive patterns, calculated optimal routes of advance, and synchronized tank movements with artillery barrages. Reconnaissance units scouted enemy positions, relayed intelligence, and identified potential strongpoints. In this way, Sherman crews were not merely operating machines. They were executing a coordinated strategy designed to overwhelm defenses, maximize psychological shock, and minimize casualties. The German military, while experienced and well-trained, faced significant challenges. Resources were stretched, fortifications were undermanned, and the ability to respond to massed armored assaults was limited. The Allies' ability to combine speed, firepower, and coordination created a tactical and psychological advantage, setting the stage for engagements where German soldiers would confront American tanks as an unstoppable force. In the forests of the Ardennes, across the frozen rivers and along fortified ridges, the Sherman became more than a vehicle. It became a symbol of technological and strategic mastery. Its advance signaled the convergence of industry, innovation, and battlefield acumen, a combination that would redefine the Western Front. As American forces prepared for late 1944 operations, the stage was set. German soldiers believed in the strength of their last defensive lines. Yet the Sherman, backed by infantry, artillery, and careful planning, would challenge that belief. The coming battles would demonstrate not only the destructive power of armored warfare but the psychological impact of facing relentless mechanized force, German defensive. Strategy in late 1944 relied heavily on a combination of terrain, fortifications, and disciplined infantry. Soldiers dug intricate trench networks, reinforced bunkers with concrete, and laid mines and barbed wire to channel attacking forces into kill zones. The doctrine emphasized holding ground at all costs, relying on firepower, discipline, and the natural advantages of terrain to offset the growing material superiority of the Allies. In forested areas like the Ardennes, defenders used dense tree cover and high ground to conceal positions and delay advances. Panzerjäger units equipped with anti-tank weapons were positioned to ambush armored vehicles, while machine gun nests and artillery emplacements created overlapping fields of fire. Every defensive measure was designed to slow American tanks, inflict casualties, and buy time for reinforcements or counterattacks. Yet the reality of facing massed American armor was drastically different from German expectations. Sherman tanks advanced in coordinated formations, supported by infantry and artillery that neutralized defensive strongpoints before the German forces could react. Mines and wire were often crushed or bypassed by engineering units, while tanks fired with precision into bunkers and fortified positions. The combination of mobility, armor, and firepower created a level of momentum that German soldiers were ill-prepared to withstand. Psychologically, the presence of tanks was devastating. Infantry trained to hold positions against artillery and small arms now faced massive steel machines that could crush obstacles, suppress defenders, and survive small arms fire. The roar of engines, the rattle of tracks, and the sudden eruption of shells created an atmosphere of awe and terror. Soldiers who might have fought tenaciously against conventional attacks were forced to reconsider their positions under the relentless advance of mechanized units. German commanders also faced logistical constraints. Fuel, ammunition, and replacement vehicles were increasingly scarce, limiting the ability of armored units to respond effectively. While anti-tank weapons like the Panzerfaust or Pak-40 could destroy individual Shermans, coordinated assaults with infantry support meant that defenders were often outflanked or forced to fight multiple threats simultaneously. Defensive doctrine, though theoretically sound, struggled against the combined arms tactics employed by the Americans. The cumulative effect of these factors was a growing sense of shock and disbelief among German soldiers. Reports from the front describe infantry watching their positions disintegrate under tank fire, realizing that no bunker, trench, or barricade could reliably halt the advance. Even elite units, trained for resilience and defensive combat, found themselves vulnerable to armored momentum and firepower. This disparity between expectation and reality highlighted a broader transformation in modern warfare. Tanks were no longer merely support vehicles. They were decisive instruments capable of reshaping both the battlefield and the psychology of defenders. The combination of technological innovation, tactical coordination, and industrial capacity gave American forces a decisive advantage that German doctrine struggled to counter. As the first waves of American armored divisions approached critical defensive lines, German soldiers braced for the inevitable. The strength of their fortifications and training offered some reassurance, yet the approaching steel monsters heralded a new era of combat, one where human courage alone could no longer guarantee survival or success. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the battlefield itself had changed. American tanks, moving with speed, precision, and overwhelming force, were set to crush the last German defenses, marking a turning point in the European theater. Soldiers who believed in the inviolability of their positions would soon confront the reality of mechanized warfare in its most devastating form. For American tank crews, operating a Sherman was a blend of technical skill, courage, and coordination. The vehicle demanded constant attention. Drivers navigated muddy, cratered terrain. Gunners calculated angles and distances under pressure. Loaders ensured shells were ready for rapid firing. Each crew member had a role, and any mistake could be fatal. Yet, the thrill of controlling such a machine, a steel instrument capable of overwhelming enemy fortifications, was unmatched. Tanks were more than vehicles. They were mobile artillery, shields for advancing infantry, and psychological weapons. Crews learned to time their movements with supporting units. Infantry cleared anti-tank threats. Engineers removed obstacles, and artillery softened strong points ahead. The Sherman's 75mm and later 76mm guns allowed precision strikes against bunkers, pillboxes, and machine gun nests, making it possible to neutralize positions before infantry engagement. On the receiving end, German soldiers faced a shocking reality. Trenches, foxholes, and barbed wire that had previously offered security were now vulnerable. The roar of approaching tanks, combined with the earth-shaking recoil of their guns, created terror. Infantry units scrambled, firing Panzerfausts or attempting ambushes, only to find that coordination and sheer armored momentum rendered many defenses ineffective. Psychologically, the tanks induced awe and disbelief. Soldiers reported that entire defensive lines seemed to collapse under the relentless advance, even before a direct hit. The combination of visible armor, rapid movement, and devastating firepower undermined morale. Discipline, the cornerstone of German defensive doctrine, faltered in the face of overwhelming mechanized force. Tactically, tanks reshaped the battlefield. Engineers cleared obstacles, allowing columns to move through heavily defended zones. Gunners targeted critical points in bunkers or trenches, forcing defenders to expose themselves or retreat. Infantry leveraged the protection of armored hulls to advance behind the tanks, creating a synergy that magnified both offensive and defensive effectiveness. For American commanders, timing and coordination were paramount. Tanks moved in synchronized waves, ensuring that firepower was concentrated where needed most. Supporting artillery and air reconnaissance enhanced effectiveness, while rapid communication allowed for adjustments in real time. Success depended not solely on the machine, but on human skill applied with precision, discipline, and adaptability. German infantry attempted to counter, relying on terrain knowledge, anti-tank weapons, and small unit tactics. Yet the psychological impact was persistent. Men hesitated to emerge from cover, delayed counterattacks, and often abandoned positions preemptively. The battlefield had become a contest of perception as much as force, where fear amplified the effectiveness of American tactics. Even within the Sherman crews, stress and danger were ever present. Anti-tank rounds, mines, and sniper fire constantly threatened mobility. Decisions had to be instantaneous, often under life or death conditions. Yet this danger heightened focus and coordination, illustrating the duality of armored warfare. Immense destructive power paired with vulnerability and human reliance. In these interactions, the human and tactical angles intertwined. The tanks were mechanical, but they were guided by human skill, decision-making, and courage. The defender's shock was human, yet exploited by tactical design and coordination. Every movement, every shell, every suppressed bunker exemplified how technology and human factors combined to redefine the nature of combat. The clash of steel and flesh, courage and machinery, revealed a truth about modern warfare. Mastery of technology, when paired with disciplined human execution, could dictate the outcome of battles. German soldiers would soon realize that the rules had changed, and that the relentless advance of American tanks marked not only physical destruction, but a profound psychological shift on the battlefield. Technology defined the advantage of American armored forces. The M4 Sherman, though not the heaviest tank of the war, offered reliability, speed, and versatility. Variants with upgraded 76mm guns or enhanced armor allowed crews to engage both fortified positions and enemy armor effectively. The tank's suspension and engine design enabled maneuverability across mud, snow, and rubble, while communication radios allowed coordination between units in a way German defenses struggled to counter. Armor alone did not guarantee success. Precision in deployment transformed the Sherman into a weapon of psychological as well as physical impact. Coordinated waves of tanks, supported by artillery and infantry, delivered simultaneous assaults that neutralized defenses before German soldiers could organize a counterattack. The visual and auditory dominance of a tank column, combined with explosions and rapid destruction of fortifications, amplified fear and disbelief among defenders. Leadership played a critical role. American commanders studied terrain, calculated optimal points of attack, and synchronized movements with supporting arms. Officers understood the psychological weight of mechanized firepower. By timing tank advances with artillery barrages, air reconnaissance, and infantry maneuvers, leaders ensured that enemy defenders were overwhelmed both physically and mentally. The battlefield became a carefully orchestrated display of technological mastery and strategic foresight. Moral considerations were complex. Tanks demolished defensive positions, sometimes crushing fortifications occupied by soldiers unwilling or unable to surrender. The psychological effect, fear, awe, and helplessness, was as significant as physical destruction. Commanders recognized that inducing shock and hesitation could minimize American casualties. Yet it also confronted soldiers with the ethical reality of modern mechanized warfare. Total domination, rapid destruction, and the thin line between tactical advantage and human suffering. On the German side, leadership struggled under unprecedented stress. Commanders attempted to reinforce bunkers, relocate Panzerjäger units, and orchestrate counterattacks. Yet the mobility and firepower of Shermans forced reactive decision-making. Units that might have resisted longer under conventional artillery now faced fast-moving threats that disrupted cohesion, impeded communication, and forced split-second tactical choices. The mental burden was immense, and even seasoned officers acknowledged the unparalleled effectiveness of coordinated armored assaults. Technological superiority and leadership convergence created a decisive battlefield dynamic. Tanks, guided by skillful crews and synchronized strategies, exploited weaknesses in fortifications, terrain, and morale. The synergy of armor, infantry, and artillery allowed American forces to dictate engagements, while German defenders struggled to adapt to a new form of combat that challenged both doctrine and psychology. The moral weight of armored dominance became clearer in post-war reflections. While physical destruction and tactical success were undeniable, the human cost, particularly for defenders forced to confront overwhelming steel and firepower, highlighted the ethical dimensions of mechanized warfare. The Sherman was not just a machine, it was a symbol of industrial might, strategy, and the psychological reach of technology. By the conclusion of the Western Front campaigns, American tank forces had redefined combat. They demonstrated that innovation, leadership, and coordination could combine to deliver decisive advantage. German infantry, courageous and disciplined, were forced to confront a battlefield where mobility, firepower, and psychological dominance dictated outcomes. The Sherman tank, in its mechanical precision and destructive potential, had become more than a weapon. It had become a force that reshaped strategy, morale, and the very perception of war. Every crushed bunker, every shattered defensive line, and every retreating German unit underscored a fundamental lesson: mastery of technology, when applied with human skill and tactical foresight, could dictate the fate of battles. The Western Front had become a theater where steel, strategy, and psychological pressure converged, and German soldiers would never view defensive warfare in the same way again. October 1944, Aachen, Germany. The city had become a symbolic and strategic target for the Allies. The first German city to face a full-scale armored assault. German defenders, entrenched in fortified buildings and bunkers, braced for the advancing American 3rd Armored Division. They had withstood artillery, air raids, and infantry assaults, yet nothing prepared them for the weight of American armor. On the outskirts, Sherman tanks rumbled over shattered roads, their 75mm cannons firing into pillboxes and fortified positions. The roar of engines and the explosions of shells reverberated through the streets. Infantry followed closely, using the tanks as cover, advancing through rubble-strewn alleys and smoke-filled avenues. The coordinated assault left defenders disoriented. Every attempt to mount a counterattack was met with mobile, armored precision. Captain Karl Mayer, defending Aachen's northern sector, later recalled, "The ground shook, the buildings trembled, and we saw tanks everywhere. It was as if the earth itself had risen against us. Our defenses? They crumbled under steel we could not stop." The tactical impact was immediate. Bunkers collapsed, barbed wire shredded, and trenches were overrun. German soldiers attempted to fire Panzerfausts from concealed positions, yet the speed and coordination of the armored advance made targeting nearly impossible. Smoke, dust, and the glare of explosions amplified confusion, breaking defensive cohesion. American commanders capitalized on the psychological effect. Tanks advanced in waves, covering each other while artillery and infantry synchronized attacks. Positions that might have taken hours to neutralize fell within minutes. The visible dominance of armor forced German units to retreat or surrender, reducing American casualties and accelerating the capture of the city. Beyond Aachen, in the forests of the Ardennes, tanks played a decisive role during early engagements leading to the Battle of the Bulge. American armored brigades penetrated heavily fortified lines, crushing resistance and disrupting German logistics. Anti-tank weapons, once feared, proved insufficient against the combined mobility, firepower, and coordination of Sherman units. Commanders observed that even experienced infantry hesitated when faced with massed armor moving with precision and speed. The human and mechanical synergy defined the climax of these assaults. Crew coordination, tactical timing, and psychological dominance converged to break the last German defenses. Soldiers experienced the dual reality of awe and terror, witnessing the destruction while realizing the inevitability of their position's collapse. By nightfall, Aachen was largely under American control. German defensive units were scattered, morale shattered, and fortifications destroyed. The Sherman's impact was both physical and psychological. It had neutralized entrenched positions and rewritten the expectations of defenders about what armored warfare could accomplish. The events at Aachen foreshadowed the broader strategic implications of American armored dominance. German infantry, even when disciplined and prepared, found that traditional fortifications were increasingly ineffective. The battlefield had evolved. Steel, mobility, and coordinated tactics had redefined combat, leaving defenders to confront an unprecedented combination of physical destruction and psychological pressure. The lessons from Aachen would echo throughout subsequent campaigns. As American tanks rolled into the Rhineland and beyond, German defenses faltered under the relentless advance. Soldiers who once relied on terrain and fortifications were forced to adapt to a form of warfare that prioritized speed, precision, and the integration of technology with human execution. The stage was set for the final pushes into Germany. American armored divisions had demonstrated that when applied with discipline and strategy, tanks could not only destroy defensive positions but also dominate the battlefield mentally. The clash of steel and human courage had reached a turning point, one that would accelerate the collapse of German resistance in the months to come. March 1945. The Rhine River loomed ahead, a natural barrier and a symbol of the heartland of Germany. German forces had fortified its banks, anticipating an Allied crossing. Trenches, bunkers, and artillery positions lined the river's edge, and infantry awaited the approaching American units with tense resolve. Yet the Allies had learned from Aachen and the Ardennes. Coordinated armored assaults could shatter even the strongest defenses. Sherman tanks, supported by engineer units and infantry, spearheaded the crossings. Floating bridges allowed mechanized divisions to advance rapidly, while artillery and air support suppressed enemy positions. Tanks fired into bunkers, demolished obstacles, and provided mobile cover for soldiers navigating minefields. The German defenders, despite reinforced positions, were ill-prepared for the combination of speed, firepower, and coordination. The psychological effect was immediate. German infantry reported seeing entire defensive lines collapse under armored momentum. The roar of engines, the fire of tank cannons, and the chaos of explosions created confusion and hesitation. Even elite units, experienced in defensive operations, struggled to maintain cohesion. The battlefield had become dominated not by fortifications or numbers, but by maneuver, firepower, and perception across multiple sectors. American tank columns advanced simultaneously, preventing German units from regrouping. Engineers cleared mines and wire, while tanks neutralized strongpoints, creating a continuous wave of mechanized assault. Infantry leveraged the protection of the tanks to move forward, establishing bridgeheads and securing key objectives. German commanders attempted localized counterattacks, yet the pace and precision of the American advance made coordinated defense nearly impossible. The collapse of defensive cohesion was evident in communications and reports. Panzer units were bypassed or destroyed piecemeal, infantry positions were abandoned, and logistical support broke down under continuous pressure. Tanks had become both shield and spear, a dual instrument of destruction and protection, enabling rapid, decisive advances that overwhelmed even the most prepared defenders. The Rhine crossings demonstrated the culmination of American armored doctrine. Technology, strategy, and human execution converged to produce battlefield dominance. Sherman tanks were more than weapons. They were symbols of mobility, industrial might, and psychological influence. Every destroyed bunker, every overturned obstacle, and every captured strongpoint confirmed the effectiveness of integrated mechanized warfare. For German infantry, the realization was stark. Entrenched defenses were insufficient. Fortifications designed to withstand artillery or infantry assaults could not resist the synchronized power of tanks, engineers, and supporting units. Fear and awe spread through the ranks, eroding morale and undermining defensive strategy. The battlefield had transformed into a three-dimensional theater where steel and strategy dictated survival. By late March, the final lines of German resistance along the Rhine were breached. Tanks continued their relentless advance into the German heartland, crushing fortifications, scattering infantry, and creating opportunities for rapid exploitation by follow-on forces. The psychological and physical dominance of armored units had decisively shifted the operational tempo in favor of the Allies. The consequences were profound. Not only had the Sherman tanks neutralized last-ditch defenses, but they had demonstrated the potential of mechanized warfare to reshape entire campaigns. German soldiers, regardless of experience or discipline, were forced to confront a reality in which technology, coordination, and human skill could decisively determine outcomes. As the Allies pushed further into Germany, the battlefield had been irrevocably changed. The Sherman tank, combined with strategic leadership and integrated forces, had crushed defenses, shattered morale, and defined a new paradigm of modern warfare. Steel and strategy had prevailed over fortifications and tradition, marking the climax of armored dominance on the Western Front. By April 1945, the effects of American armored dominance were unmistakable. German fortifications along the Western Front, trenches, bunkers, and defensive emplacements, had been systematically reduced to rubble. Cities, ridges, and river crossings bore the scars of tanks rolling through streets, crushing obstacles, and demolishing defensive positions. The physical evidence of destruction was stark, yet it was the psychological impact that resonated most with German infantry. For soldiers who had relied on fortifications and disciplined defense, the advance of Sherman tanks created disbelief and fear. Trenches once thought secure were torn open. Barbed wire and obstacles were rendered ineffective. Anti-tank weapons, though lethal when used individually, were overwhelmed by coordinated assaults. The rhythm of mechanized firepower left little time for reaction, forcing many defenders to retreat, surrender, or risk annihilation. Reports from the front illustrate the dual effect of tanks: physical destruction and psychological disruption. German infantry recounted witnessing positions crumble under relentless armored advances, often before tanks directly engaged. The combined noise, firepower, and visible momentum of a tank column created an atmosphere of inevitability, undermining confidence and cohesion. Soldiers experienced a sense of futility, recognizing that traditional defenses could no longer hold against mechanized force. American forces observed tangible benefits. Infantry losses were reduced, and assaults that might have required days of fighting were completed in hours. Tanks not only destroyed physical obstacles, but also acted as mobile cover for advancing troops. This synergy between armor and infantry optimized operational efficiency, while preserving human life on the Allied side. The destruction extended beyond military positions. Infrastructure in captured towns and cities suffered significant damage. Roads, bridges, and buildings were often damaged or demolished during armored assaults, reflecting the combined effects of tactical necessity and the sheer force of mechanized advance. Civilians bore the consequences, facing displacement and loss, highlighting the collateral reality of modern, high-intensity warfare. The psychological strain on German defenders was compounded by logistical collapse. Supply lines were disrupted, reinforcements delayed, and communication networks fractured. Infantry units, unable to consolidate positions, were forced into reactive stances. Tank assaults had not only destroyed fortifications, but had also reshaped the decision-making environment of the battlefield, leaving German commanders constantly responding rather than initiating. Even elite German formations, trained for resilience and precision, were tested beyond expectation. Observers noted hesitation, confusion, and early withdrawal as tank columns advanced. The integration of engineering support, infantry coordination, and armored firepower created a dynamic that left few options for defenders. Each captured objective demonstrated the convergence of technology, human skill, and strategic planning, underscoring the overwhelming effectiveness of the Allied approach. By the end of major engagements, it was clear that the Sherman had become more than a vehicle. It was a decisive instrument of war, capable of dismantling entrenched positions, dictating tempo, and reshaping morale. German defenses, once considered formidable, had been overcome not solely through firepower, but through a combination of precision, coordination, and psychological dominance. The immediate aftermath of these armored assaults set the stage for the final pushes into Germany. Fortifications were neutralized, infantry morale was shattered, and the operational advantage firmly rested with the Allies. The tanks had not merely won battles, they had redefined expectations of combat, forcing both sides to acknowledge that modern warfare had entered a new era dominated by mechanized mobility and technological precision. By late April 1945, the Western Front had been irrevocably altered by American armored superiority. German defensive doctrine, once reliant on fortifications, tactical patience, and disciplined infantry, had been rendered increasingly obsolete. Sherman tanks, supported by infantry, artillery, and engineers, had demonstrated that mobility, firepower, and coordination could decisively shape the battlefield. German commanders attempted last-minute adaptations. Reinforced positions were constructed, panzer units repositioned, and anti-tank teams redeployed to strategic choke points. Yet these measures were largely ineffective. The rapid tempo of American assaults, combined with overwhelming mechanized firepower, left little opportunity for preparation or coordinated resistance. Even experienced units found their efforts neutralized by speed, precision, and psychological impact. The strategic consequences were profound. American tank dominance accelerated the collapse of German defensive lines, enabling Allied forces to penetrate the Rhineland and advance toward the heart of Germany. Cities and fortifications that might have required protracted sieges fell swiftly under combined arms assaults. Logistical systems broke down, reinforcements were delayed or destroyed, and German morale plummeted. The psychological advantage gained by armored units proved as decisive as their physical firepower. Technological and tactical innovation were central to this outcome. Sherman tanks, produced in large numbers and supported by engineering and artillery units, exemplified the intersection of industrial capacity and battlefield strategy. Coordination with reconnaissance and infantry allowed for precise targeting, rapid advancement, and minimal delay, creating a template for future armored operations. The lessons learned in the Ardennes, Aachen, and across the Rhine informed post-war military doctrine, influencing the design and deployment of tanks and mechanized units worldwide. For German infantry, the experience was transformative. Soldiers confronted a reality in which fortifications and traditional defensive tactics were insufficient. The dominance of armored units forced a re-evaluation of battlefield priorities, the role of morale, and the vulnerabilities inherent in static defense. Units that survived often did so through improvisation, dispersion, or surrender, rather than through conventional resistance. The moral and psychological dimensions were equally significant. The capacity to destroy defensive positions while simultaneously instilling fear and hesitation demonstrated the profound impact of mechanized warfare. Soldiers recognized that battle was no longer solely a contest of courage or discipline, but also a confrontation with technological and strategic mastery. The human cost, while mitigated for American forces, remained high for German defenders and civilians alike, underscoring the ethical complexity of total mechanized warfare. The long-term implications extended beyond the immediate campaign. The effectiveness of Sherman tanks and integrated armored doctrine established a precedent for future conflicts, shaping NATO and Warsaw Pact strategies in the Cold War. The integration of mobility, firepower, and psychological dominance became a foundational principle of modern, mechanized combat. By the end of the Western Front campaigns, the legacy of American tanks was clear. They had crushed last-ditch defenses, redefined operational tempo, and reshaped both the physical and psychological landscapes of warfare. German infantry, despite training, discipline, and bravery, had faced a new paradigm, one where mechanized superiority dictated outcomes and redefined the possibilities of battlefield strategy. The American armored advance had not only won battles, it had rewritten the rules of engagement. Steel, coordination, and tactical precision had triumphed over entrenched doctrine, leaving an enduring lesson for the conduct of war in the modern era. The story of American tanks crushing German defenses is a testament to the convergence of technology, strategy, and human resolve. Sherman tanks were not mere machines. They were instruments of precision, coordination, and psychological impact. Their advance over Aachen, the Ardennes, and the Rhine demonstrated that modern warfare was no longer defined solely by courage or discipline. but by the integration of mechanized power and tactical mastery. For German soldiers, the experience was both shocking and transformative. Fortifications, bunkers, and defensive lines, symbols of training and resilience, were reduced under coordinated armored assaults. Fear, awe, and disbelief became as influential as bullets and shells, reshaping morale and decision-making. The battlefield itself became a theater of psychological as well as physical force. The Sherman's success was a product of human skill, industrial capacity, and leadership. Crews synchronized their movements with infantry, engineers, and artillery, executing strategies that neutralized obstacles and exploited weaknesses. The combination of mobility, firepower, and coordination proved decisive, accelerating campaigns, minimizing Allied casualties, and redefining operational tempo. Yet, with dominance came reflection. The human cost of mechanized warfare remained profound. Civilians and defenders alike bore the consequences of relentless assault. The ethical weight of such overwhelming force underscores a fundamental truth. Technological mastery can dictate outcomes, but it cannot erase the realities of suffering and destruction inherent in war. The legacy of these armored campaigns endures. They reshaped modern combat doctrine, demonstrated the decisive potential of mechanized forces, and highlighted the intricate balance between technology and human decision-making. Steel and strategy dictated the battlefield, but courage, skill, and discipline determined how that power was wielded. In the end, American tanks did more than crush fortifications. They reshaped the understanding of warfare itself. The Western Front was forever altered, a testament to the power of innovation, the weight of strategy, and the enduring human experience at the heart of combat.